Concept of regions and availability zones. AWS has n number of regions. What that means is that depending on where you are in the world and from where you are creating the AWS account, you will be allocated a particular region. You can think about it as your home region. Okay. So a region, right? Suppose I am logging in from India. My region would be related to India. Okay. Under the region comes the concept of availability zones, right? So here's the region. I'm just picking one region, let's say India, Mumbai or AP South, whatever you want to call it. Under the region, there will be a bunch of what we call as availability zones. 2 or more availability zones may be there. Now, depending on the region, they can have 2 or 3 or 4 availability zones. So it's not mandatory or it's not fixed that every region has the same number of availability zones. Okay. So for example, I'm just randomly saying I have taken a region 1 and it has got 2 availability zones. Okay. So these are the two terms that you need to remember: region and availability zone. Now, if you have to think about it, what exactly is availability zone? An availability zone is made up of 1 or 2 or more data centers. Okay. Though the term data center will never come up like this, but in your mind, if you have to think, if you are curious, what exactly is an availability zone, you can think about it. It is a combination of 1 or more data centers. Okay. So for now, I am just for explanation purpose saying that availability zone 1 is made up of DC1, DC2, DC3. Okay. And similarly, availability zone 2 is made up of 2 data centers called as DC4 and DC5. Data center 4, DC5. Okay. So this is what it is. So region and availability zone. Okay. The next concept that you need to understand is what we call as a VPC, Virtual Private Cloud. VPC, Virtual Private Cloud. Okay. So every individual, when they sign into or log into the AWS console, they land up into what they call as their own private virtual cloud. That's the reason we call it a virtual private cloud. Okay. So suppose there are 2 users. Let's say I am Sachin and there's another user by the name of Ashok. So he has created his own account and I am logging in from my computer into AWS. I go into console, I log in. So when Sachin logs in, Sachin gets his own VPC. And when Ashok logs in, so Ashok gets his own VPC. Okay. And whatever I create, right? Whatever I create, for example, I create a virtual machine. My virtual machine will be created in my VPC. Okay. So this VPC that I get, right, when I log in, we can call it as a default VPC. Default VPC. And similarly, when Ashok logs in and the VPC that he gets is his default VPC. Okay. And do keep in mind that Sachin, whatever he is doing as a user, he is totally, doing this in his environment, in his VPC, and has no clue or no visibility into what Ashok is doing in his VPC. And the same also holds true for Ashok. Ashok cannot see whatever Sachin is doing. So that's the reason we say Sachin's VPC, default VPC, and Ashok's default VPC. Okay. So now we have understood the concept of region, we have understood the concept of availability zone and the concept of VPC. Okay. Alright. One last thing here before we can go into the console and look into that detail. Let me explain this. So let us say that I am user Sachin. What do? I go and log in. to AWS console using my account. Okay, I log in. So by default I land into a particular what we call as a default region. And I'll show you in the AWS console what I mean. I land into my default region. Okay. Second thing is, now if I want to say create a EC2 instance, right? EC2 instance. Okay. When I launch this instance, I have during the configuration steps, when I select the different parts, I have the option of, selecting the name, giving it a particular image, the machine type, and along with that, I have the option of selecting, when I am launching this, which availability zone I launch this, I create this VM into. So I have the capability of picking up whether it is going to be AZ1 or AZ2 or which not. So this is how it works. So one can think about it and saying that the VPC, right, wherever you are creating the EC2 instance, right, the default VPC spans across multiple availability zones. Okay, so keep that in mind. The three terms, the region, right, it depends on where you are logging from, where you have created the AWS account from. Second thing is the availability zone. Availability zone is a subset or a sub part of the region. Depending, every region has different number of availability zones. It is not required that every region has to have 2 or 3. It depends on the requirements, how many is the demand in that particular geography of the world. Based on that, AWS creates availability zones, right? And if down the line, if the demand increases, they go ahead and increase the availability zones also. Okay, so the region, the availability zone, and what exactly is an availability zone? Availability zone is combination of multiple data centers. Okay, the next thing to remember and summarize here is the VPC. VPC stands for Virtual Private Cloud, and every individual who's logging into an account, right, gets their own VPC. Okay, and the VPC spans across multiple availability zones. Okay, now we can get back to the console and I will demonstrate when we are launching an EC2 instance, where exactly, what is the region and how do we select availability zone. That's what, let's look into the console now. So let me log into the account. So this is what I see when I log in, and if you go on the top right side here and click on this drop down menu, this is where we see the different regions that are available. As you can see, for me, the Northern California, which is known as US West 1, is selected by default. So this is my default region. So, and why is this? Because when I created the account, I had my geographical location was in California, and it took that into consideration while creating the account and giving me my default region. Okay, so this is where the regions comes in. And of course, we have the flexibility of changing this region where we want to. So I can go ahead and select Mumbai, okay, and change my region to be Mumbai. This is how it will work. Okay, and it's, as you can see on the top, now the Asia Pacific Mumbai region appears selected. Okay, I'm going to switch it back to my default region, which is Northern California. Coming back here. So that's what is the concept of region. And next, now I want to demonstrate where exactly we select the availability zone. So this is something that we have already done. What? It is creating a VM, and for the steps for them are giving it a name. Let's just say VM1, and then select the image type, which is in this case Amazon Linux AWS selected, and then in this AMI I'm selecting as whatever it is, I'm leaving it as it is, and then instance type, the machine type that I want is T2 micro, I'm going to leave it as it is. Key pair, again we know how to create it. If there's not there, we can go ahead and create it. I'm just giving it a name, my key. My key, and I'm selecting the party version of it. Create my key, it's going to download it. Next, in the network settings, up until now we have skipped this portion. All of this portion we have skipped and directly jumped onto the security group aspect. Okay, now we are going to look further into network settings. So why did I skip? Because I wanted to keep things very simple. Okay, now that we have understood what exactly how to create a virtual machine or a EC2 instance, I am now going into the details of it. And the way is, again, if you look at this, this is the VPC. Okay, this is nothing but the default VPC ID. Okay, default VPC ID, and then subnet. If you look, there's no preference. Okay, default subnet in any availability zone. So it says randomly pick the subnet in any availability zone. Okay. Now, if I edit this from here, okay, then I have the option of going and selecting the subnet. Here it says no preference, right? If I can go and click on this drop down menu, what do I get? I get option of selecting either of the two subnets. Subnet this, okay, in this subnet is an availability zone US West 1C. Okay, and the subnet details are given here 172.31.16.0/20, or the other subnet is in the other availability zone. Okay, so here I can go ahead and select. Now as you can see, this is how whatever I selected the subnet in a particular availability zone has been selected. The rest is same, nothing changes here. Okay, so this is the concept of regions and availability zones. Do keep in mind that you have the flexibility of choosing and selecting or changing the regions, and within the region you have the flexibility of, when you launch a virtual machine, you have the flexibility of selecting the availability zone as per your choice.